You have no idea who I am, right?
I do not.
We are strangers. We've never met before, right? You're going to come and you're going to ask your questions, and I'm going to answer them. And if anybody walks in, Adam, just have them sit down, and I will greet them as they walk in and explain what it is that's going on. So this is an Ask Me Anything session. You can ask me anything as long as it's about cocoa or chocolate. I'm not going to answer any questions about my dating life or anything like that. But I have been working in the fields of cocoa and chocolate professionally since 1999. I have the coolest job in the world. I get to travel from the chocolate capitals of Europe to small farms in cocoa producing countries, and I know most aspects of the cocoa value chain from the farm, right, through the logistics chain into some of the smallest chocolate factories of the world, and I have visited the largest chocolate factory in the world. I know a little bit about stuff. I personally do not make chocolate as a business, but I have been teaching how to make chocolate, right, since 2006. I make my living as a consultant, even though I'm the world's first professional chocolate critic. Nobody is paying money like you'd buy a subscription to Wine Spectator, or you'd go and spend money on Robert Parker, who's telling you the best wines to buy. Nobody is making a full-time living as an independent chocolate critic, right? The main reason why is that chocolate doesn't appreciate in value as it ages. I can buy a case of wine now, and in 20 years, if I buy the right wine, it might be worth 10 or 20 or 30 times more than what it is that I paid for today. I can buy a case of chocolate today, and 6 months from now, it's ruined. So the economic drivers around being a chocolate critic are very, very different from what they are for wine. Beers will age, spirits will age, they'll increase in value. Cheese generally doesn't increase in value unless it's a hard aged cheese, but for the most part, cheese doesn't. So balsamic vinegar, 75-year-old AIB certified balsamic vinegar can go for over $2,000 a liter, compared with $4 for something cheap at Costco. So chocolate occupies this really, really interesting space. It is one of the most beloved flavors in the world, but most people don't know anything about where it comes from or how it's made or how they should approach eating it. And one of the reasons are eating it, tasting it. So the difference between eating and tasting is that tasting is a conscious process where you're trying to think about, what does this smell like? What are the flavors that I'm getting? How do the aromas and the flavors come together into what we call taste? What are the sensations that I'm feeling? That's what tasting is about. Eating is that it's indiscriminate kind of stuff. And so most people haven't really thought about that with chocolate. And one of the main differences is because when we think about very high-end cheese, really expensive balsamic vinegar, wine and beer and spirits, how many people, totally, I get it. But how many do you consume when you're 3? Chocolate is the only one, maybe cheese, right? So what we like as adults in chocolate is very much informed by our childhood experiences in chocolate. And that's another thing. We have this expectation of chocolate from when we are children, but we don't start drinking coffee usually until we're in our teens. We're probably not consuming alcohol seriously, right, again, until we're in our teens, right? Some early teens, some much later. So there's this very different relationship that we have with chocolate than we have with all the other foods, right? And that's why I'm here, right? You're out there, you said you make a little chocolate, but you're out there looking at these different exhibitors, some of whom are from a producing country. So we have Liberia and Ghana, Madagascar, Honduras, Mexico, Colombia, right? They actually now grow cocoa in Japan, although the people from Japan, Suisse Escalier, aren't using Japanese cocoa beans quite yet. Right?
Yeah, I talked to...
You talked to Tomomi.
Yeah, I tried a couple like black sesame,
Yeah.
Some things that you just don't find that you're in your local area.
So do you have an ear monitor? Can you hear this, or should I respond? Adam?
No, I can hear him too. It's good.
Oh, you're okay. I just want to make sure that...
When he's talking to I'm just watching.
Gotcha. Just want to make sure that again, I'm used to doing this quite often, And normally the way things are mic'd, I have to end up repeating the questions so that people in the back of the room, as well as if they're recording, can hear. And I just wanted, so, we got Nikki's in the back of the room, and I don't know if Nikki can hear what it is that is being said, but I'm just trying to be a responsible host.
Repeating your question.
I understand repeating the question. Yes, Adam, repeating the question or repeating what is said will not hurt anything. I got that. But so one of the things that is really interesting, and one way you might explore the field of chocolate, is that there's been a lot of emphasis on what we think of as single origin chocolate and chocolate which is free of other ingredients. So it's like only cocoa beans and sugar, or only cocoa beans and sugar and cocoa butter. Right. Chocolate makers nowadays are increasingly faced with rising costs. They have no control over the cost of cocoa, and recently the cost of cocoa nearly quadrupled. And they are faced with, how do we create products which we can afford to make and people can afford to buy? And one way you do that is by adding other ingredients. So there's a long tradition, right, in commodity confectionery. So for example, if we were to look at a Snickers bar is mostly sugar and peanuts, right? And it's sugar in the form of nougat, which has got egg whites, and it's sugar in the form of caramel, and I have peanuts, and there's this little thin shell of chocolate, right? But part of craft chocolate is you want the chocolate to be front and center. But if I'm from Japan, what are the things that are unique to Japanese food culture and the flavors that the Japanese find very, very common that I can put in chocolate? So for example, sesame seed might be one, black sesame, green tea. I might put miso paste, right? So I might do fermented soybeans and put them into the chocolate. We have a plum ume, which is a kind of Japanese plum. There are all sorts of Japanese flavors that I can incorporate into the chocolate. Very, very familiar to the Japanese, but completely unusual to people outside the culture. So we find similar kinds of things. Madagascar is known for vanilla, so putting vanilla, I guess, especially Madagascan vanilla, makes sense. But I think from Colombia, what are some really interesting flavors which are unique to Colombia? And I remember being in Colombia a couple of years ago and being up very early in the morning and being on the Sunrise Highway going to Santa Marta, which is on the coast, not far from Cartagena, which is also on the, I believe is on the coast, and stopping at a toll booth, and we're in this car, and at every single toll booth, somebody runs up with a thermos pitcher, and it's full of coffee. And it's black coffee with a lot of sugar. And it's called Truckers coffee. And it's in really cheap plastic cups. Truckers. It's for, so café por la camiona, the driver. No, that's the truck. I don't know what the driver of the truck is called in Spanish. But it is a particularly Colombian experience. And so if I were trying to do something interesting from Colombia, I might try to do a trucker's coffee and tell that story about how it's the lifeblood of things. If you go to Yohoa, for example, from Honduras, which is on the other side of the people from Colombia, there is an avocado which grows in Honduras, which tastes like anise, like fennel. And the avocado tastes like fennel, and there's a chocolate which has got this anise avocado, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're not actually adding any anise flavor, it's just coming from the freeze-dried avocado. Insane. Right? And so chocolate becomes a lens, right, to look at the food cultures of lots of other countries. And that's one way to think about this. Oh, I'd never thought about putting this flavor in chocolate before. How does it work? So Kesho is from Austin, Texas now, but the founder is from China, right? And the word Kesho is a Japanese word. And now they're taking Asian-inspired flavors and they're putting them into chocolate in some really interesting combinations. And it's a way of exploring food culture that many people don't think about when they think about chocolate and confectionery and chocolate. But the more I can put non-cocoa ingredients and make other kinds of things in them, I expand my audience, right? So I can buy a bonbon or I can buy a bar or I could buy a marshmallow that has cocoa in it, or I can buy a fig which is stuffed with tahini or peanut butter, these, and then covered in chocolate. These are ways of taking a very expensive ingredient, right, and putting it in new forms and combining it with unusual flavors. And that's one way to go out and explore what's going on. I've been talking. You said you're a chocolate maker. Do you have a question about chocolate? Because that's what I'm here for. Ask me anything.
I do.
Okay.
I have a couple questions. You
Yeah.
were rattling on.
Yeah.
I came up with a few more.
Go ahead.
So one of my first questions was a cacao brew.
Okay.
I'm looking to. I'm kind of making a little bit of cacao brew. You could, before it gets melange, you could get like a fine powder, the nibs, and maybe a little bit of husk. You could blend pack it, Vitamix it kind of get a powdery, or you can melange it for a little bit, just let it set solid. I don't know what the melting characteristics of the solid, if I want to put it in some hot water, not the milk cacao I'm talking about, but the water.
Gotcha.
More of the,
All right. So
not ceremonial. I don't know about the chili pepper and all that, but so I'm looking for a little guidance.
ceremonial cacao is its own rat's nest of stuff.
Really.
But let's ask, so you're talking about two different things. So one of which is, it is possible to granulate the cocoa nibs so that it is possible to granulate the cocoa nibs so that they resemble a ground coffee. And if you can do that, you can put it into some sort of brewer, usually a drip brewer or a French press or something like that, and you can extract the cocoa flavor the way you would if you were doing coffee. The major difference between coffee and cocoa is that cocoa is roughly 50% fat, and coffee beans are very low fat. And so one of the challenges associated with grinding the cocoa nibs into something that you can pour water over and it will percolate, or an immersion brewer, is that how do you get it to that size without heating it up to the point where the butter releases and it just clumps together? And the answer to that question is you keep things cold. One answer to the question. So for example, you can take the nibs and put them in the freezer. And if they're really cold, you can run them through a blender, a Vitamix, a Blendtec, whatever it is, and you can run them for longer without heating them up to the point where the fat starts to melt. So that's one way to do it. And so the people who do this commercially have figured out a way to grind low speed, low temperature, which gives them the particle size and the particle size distribution that they're looking for on a commercial scale. Hard to do with home equipment. If you did have, one of the major differences, one of the things that's keeping home hobbyist chocolate from working the way home hobbyist coffee works. You know much about coffee?
I roast coffee as well.
Okay, so nothing in chocolate is zero retention, right? I can get a zero retention or close to zero retention coffee grinder. If I put 20 grams in, I'm gonna get 19.9 grams out. And if I hit the knocker, I might get all 20 grams out. Nothing in chocolate is zero retention. And it is I think that single attribute of chocolate that keeps the home hobbyist away. It's just messy and dirty in a way, and it's fat, and you need to get it warm and detergent to clean it. That's a challenge. So, all right. So if you are able to grind the cocoa nibs into something that looks like coffee grounds, you're going to stay at the large end, medium or coarser. It's going to be really, really hard to get anything close to what we would think of as a fine, an espresso grind, especially for a specialty bean, right? And I shudder to think what it would be like to try to get a Turkish fine powder. When you do have really fine stuff, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to put it into a puck and run it through an espresso machine. But the problem is, the moment you get the temperature up there, the fat melts and it clogs all the pores. of the portafilter. You're never going to get anything to express through.
I haven't tried that yet because I'm thinking
It won't work.
Set up for failure.
It will. Well, it will. Yes. I mean, you could try it. You would.
100% cacao or a mix of coffee and. I
So,
think
so
a mixture might work.
so let's step back. So that's one aspect of that. The other thing is the legal definition for chocolate in the United States says you can't have more than 1.75% shell by weight. Right? So if you have 1 kilo of chocolate, you can only have like 17.5 grams of shell, right? If you want to label it as chocolate. There's no definition for brewing cocoa. So we have this tradition of cacao tea.
Yep.
So you could find a way to crush the shells so they're tiny and then mix them in to the cocoa so you get something, so the ground cocoa, so you get this mixture of the, well, but what happens is the mixture of textures, it's not really about flavor, it's about how do you go about brewing things, right? So if you have more shell, it will be less intense from a flavor perspective, but you won't have it clump up. If you're going to create anything, which, for example, I'm going to put it in the bottom of a cup and I'm going to pour hot water or hot milk over it, you want to make sure you have as little shell as possible, and you want to refine that down. And so in a melanger, if you're doing it at home, as fine as you can get. Because if you're only blending, you're never going to get the particle size down small enough so that you don't have big clumps of cocoa nibs in the bottom of your cup. So you don't have a lot of fines, which is basically what I'm saying. And so you need to make a distinction about what you're making. If you're making something which can be melted into hot water or melted into milk, you need to refine it very, very smooth. Now you could decide, I'm not going to add any sugar, and because I'm going to sweeten it after the fact,
Right.
or you could add sugar to it, and so it just becomes an all-in-one thing. So, but you asked a different question is, could I mix cocoa beans, which are ground, and coffee beans, which are ground? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? And you can play with flavor combinations in ways, again, I can get a specialty bean, which is a very light roast, and as long as I'm refining it to roughly the same particle size as I'm refining the coffee to, or the cocoa to, then you'll get something which is not going to channel too badly. That's the thing I would worry about. You're mixing it well enough so you're not going to get channeling during the course of brewing, or it's always going to be an immersion brew. But now you get this opportunity to play a lot with what happens when I get in a Colombian cocoa bean and a Colombian coffee bean. That could be interesting. Or a Brazilian coffee bean with an Ecuadorian cocoa bean. There are ways of playing with these flavors. So that would be interesting, as long as you can get the particle size of both of them roughly the same. And I would recommend an immersion brew. So either a French press, an AeroPress would be a good thing to do. So that would be the way I would do that, right? But the challenge is getting the particle size, because if you're using a conical burr grinder, right, even with a really good metal tooth set, getting the grinder to run slowly enough and to make sure it's cold enough so you're not, you know the problem. You know the problem. Yeah. So that is the problem with that, right? One way to do it, right? Put the burr set in the freezer and then install it. Get the cocoa beans, get the cocoa nibs. Well, there are some grinders.
Don't do it outside today.
There are some grinders that have burr sets that magnetically attach, right? And so they're quick replacement. But if you really wanted to go and really change the industry, get a zero retention cocoa grinder, right?
Doesn't clog.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, zero retention,
Yeah.
zero retention, no fat, right? And it doesn't exist. And as I say, I think that's the major impediment for home chocolate taking off the way home coffee has done. Right. Anyway, good morning. All right, so thank you for joining us. Do you have a question? You know who I am. My name's Clay, by the way. My name's Clay, and I am the creator and the moderator of an online community called The Chocolate Life. And I founded The Chocolate Life in 2008. And in the 17 some odd years that I've been doing it, I've had close to 20,000 members in over 160 countries on every continent except Antarctica. And before that, I had a website called chocophile.com. I have a book, which you can still buy on Amazon, called Discover Chocolate. It's the first book to talk about chocolate from the perspective of a wine connoisseur. Right, so it's now outdated. It's 18 years ago. But it is an interesting foundation that fills in the gaps of some other books that are out there. But I've been a professional critic since 2001 and a consultant and a journalist also for 20 some odd years. All right, so yes, I'm sorry, your name is?
Michael.
Hey, Michael.
Willett.
Willick?
Willett.
Okay.
We met last year.
Yes, I remember the face.
Yeah.
My background is as a photographer,
Okay.
and my degree project was in portraiture. I remember your face. I know you've seen you again, but I'm now in my late 60s, and names don't come quite as easily as they used to do. But in any event, thanks for joining us today. What's your question?
So we started up our chocolate business last year, Chicago Chocolate Rebellion. So
I'm sorry?
We started our chocolate business in Chicago last year.
In Chicago? Okay.
Chicago Chocolate Rebellion.
Chocolate Rebellion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so just looking as we going into our second year, some of the things that we've kind of learned along the way and trying to figure out how we pivot from that is that
How you pivot from what you're
Yes.
currently doing
Yeah,
to
yeah.
something new and different.
Mind if I shut the door?
Ask Adam. So it's too loud. So I was gonna repeat things, right? But
So we're kind of trying to transition the board from a cottage kitchen to commercial.
Gotcha.
And scaling up. And so one of the things that we're finding that we're hitting the roadblock with is finding sources for our product. We kind of want to stay
finding sources for ingredients?
Yeah, ingredients.
Okay.
So like we started off, playing with like the Calibet bags and all of that, and then we said, okay, we want to get away from that and start being more bean to bar,
Okay.
so we can have more control of the products that we're making.
Right.
But just with the supply scarcity around, we're trying to figure out where to find, access to more beans. So we definitely, order from Lila Cocoa Supply. Started with Meridian in order to source some of our products from there, but just with the change in climate, so to speak, that
No pun intended.
Right.
Or pun intended. Gotcha.
like where do you see?
Okay. So let me see if I can condense. So you have a relatively young business located in Chicago, and you started off by buying couverture, so it's already produced chocolate by a big company. And one of the challenges that you're facing is that given the rise in price of cocoa beans, getting consistent deliveries
Yes.
of products. So all of the big manufacturers, Barry Callebaut, all these companies are having trouble delivering chocolate on a consistent basis. And so one of the things that you're looking to do is you're looking to say, if we produce our own chocolate from cocoa beans, we might be able to get a better handle on some of our supply issues.
Yes.
No. All of the cocoa. So the reason why big chocolate companies are having problems supplying you with chocolate consistently is they're having trouble getting beans consistently, right? And they are on allocation for their customers. And some big companies like Barry Callebaut have reduced the number of SKUs that they're producing by 25%. So customers that have been relying on a particular chocolate for a decade are finding that Callebaut is no longer making that chocolate and they have to go scramble someplace else. And so they used to be able to buy it like a pallet at a time, but if they wanted a custom chocolate, now they have to buy 20 tons because that's the MOQ. So everybody is scrambling. I don't know if you know this, but Hershey's no longer makes chocolate. No. So about a decade ago, they decided they were a candy company and they wanted to de-risk their supply chain, perhaps in part due to lawsuits around illegal labor. I'm just speculating here. But they no longer manufacture chocolate. They decided they were not a chocolate company, they were a candy company. And they've outsourced their chocolate manufacture to big companies like Cargill. There are a couple of them that now supply the chocolate that Hershey uses. And they decided it made more sense for us to focus on marketing and distribution of the products, right, that we're making. And I don't know if you know this, but Hershey makes Kit Kat under license for the United States. So even though Kit Kat is owned by Nestle, in the United States is manufactured by Hershey, right? Cadbury Dairy Milk in the United States is manufactured by Hershey. In part because the definitions of what chocolate is in the UK and what chocolate is in other parts of the world are different. And we're here, and surprisingly enough, the definitions for what chocolate is are stricter in the United States than they are in the EU with respect to non-cocoa butter fats. And so rather than trying to increase the cost of all their recipes all around the world by only going to cocoa butter, right? And so they can still use non-cocoa butter fats to make a less expensive product. They just say, for the United States, we'll have somebody that says, go make this product for us. So that's what they're doing. So you need to decide what business you're in, right? So if you're making your own chocolate from your own cocoa beans, you need to determine if it's actually cheaper to do that. And if it's not cheaper, if it's worth it, right? From a brand perspective. Right? Chocolate Rebellion, maybe it's worth it from a brand perspective to do things different. So it's not just think different, it's eat different, taste different, all these kinds of things, right? Playing homage to Steve Jobs. You're going, right now, unless you are a cocoa farmer, right? And you own your own farms and you know how much production you've got, you're gonna have trouble, right? If what you're doing is, I only need to buy a couple of bags here and a couple of bags there in terms of getting sources of supply of cocoa beans. Right. And then one of the things you need to manage is the inconsistency of those beans. And so you buy from, even if you buy beans from Lila, Carvajala Cocoa Supply, one of the sponsors of the festival, or you buy them from Meridian Cacao out of Portland, Oregon, or you buy from Uncommon Cacao, who is probably most famous for the Maya Mountain brand. Okay, I'm just, the last name is Stone. I forget the first name. I'm sorry. Emily Stone, who is the founder of Uncommon, or one of the founders of Uncommon. You're going to have inconsistencies when it comes to, just because it's an agricultural product, the beans are going to taste different this year than they did there next year. So one of the challenges is going to be, how do you go find the chocolate that you're looking for? And is the chocolate of the flavor and consistency, right? The technical workability, which is really important. And you need to decide for which products, is it our entire product line or is it some of our product line? Does it make sense to focus on, it's going to taste different from year to year to year? That's one thing to find, right? We've named 3 of the largest distributors of cocoa beans into specialty chocolate in the United States, right? Between Cocoa Supply, Meridian, and Uncommon, those are the 3 best known. So Chocolate Alchemy, whom you may know, John Nancy, probably the single most important person in the entire craft chocolate movement. He resells beans from many of these people. And so you need to understand which beans come from which places, which come from which distributors. There are other distributors. For example, in Amsterdam, there's a specialty cocoa distributor called Darnhauer, one called Silva Cacao, another one called Gaia Cacao. There are other sources of beans, but they don't have US offices. And so you need to think about what that means in terms of availability. Now, right now, the Trump administrations have taken the tariffs off of cocoa beans, but they've left the tariffs on chocolate. And so I would rather if I was going to do this, I would import the cocoa beans rather than import the chocolate. Who are the big industrial makers of chocolate in the United States? So one of them is Guittard in San Francisco. Do you know the Guittard family? People don't know this, but are you familiar with a California candy company called See's? S-E-E''S? Right? Well, See's is a family-owned business, started in Los Angeles, I want to say, right after World War I, so sometime 1915, 1925, something in there. But they've been owned by Warren Buffett since 1963, Berkshire Hathaway. Right? So in terms of a long-term play and financial stability, See's is an interesting one. Who makes the chocolate for them? Guittard. So if you're not familiar with the Guittard product line, it's something to consider. made in the United States. So they're importing cocoa beans. They might be using American sugar, except if they're going organic, because we don't grow organic sugar in the United States. We have to get that from Paraguay or someplace else. But, right, it is made in the US. And so from a tariff structure, it's going to be different, right? And there's another company called IRCA, IRCA. They decided to move manufacturing into the United States, and you can do that. You might consider them as a source because they're bringing in beans. And so I think that those are two of the largest when you're thinking about companies for which are domestic manufacturers of chocolate. What I might do is I might say, it's probably best to do this within a single manufacturer rather than moving across manufacturers, would be to do a custom blend. So you might kind of like their 65%, but you want it to be a little punchier, and their 70% is too much. Get some 65% and some liquor and mix it together. So that would be a way to get the formulations that you're looking for. Unless what you're looking for is, oh, it needs to be a Colombian origin, or it needs to be a Madagascar origin, or it needs to be some other origin. In which case I'd say do that bean to bar. But for the 80% of your product, for the 80% of your customers who don't know the difference, don't care about the difference, or don't want to pay for the difference, right? Then use another product. And so there are a number of companies here in the United States and other parts of the world where they have done that. So French Broad, for example, bean to bar company out of Asheville, North Carolina, had, before they started making all their chocolate for all their own bonbons, they had bean to bar for a bar line, and then they were using industrial chocolate for the bonbon line. And they were very careful to separate the two of them. So that might be another way to think about doing it. So, because at the moment, unless you have really tight control over your labor costs, your making chocolate in-house is going to be more expensive. And number one, don't expect the cost of chocolate or the cost of cocoa beans or the cost of butter to come down anytime soon, right? Even though the price of cocoa beans on the futures exchange, cash right now is around $5,500 a metric ton, as I showed in my slide yesterday, right? People are still working through the inventory that they paid $10,000 a ton for. And so the price of cocoa is not going to come down until everybody has worked through their inventory of beans they paid a lot for. And it may never come down because they're enjoying having those big, huge margins that they haven't been able to have before. So, all right, you might be able to buy beans at the lower price, right? You may be able to, but it's going to take a while for the chocolate to come down at the same level. Really complicated answer to a simple question, but does that help you go through?
It does make sense for us to, like, for what we're making right now, we do bonbons and bars. And so we have assigned particular origins that we can get a quantity, or we have in stock enough to, produce those items. And we try to carry at least a 6-month inventory in order to produce those things. But as, scarcity hits for particular origins, then we really do need to consider the pivot of having just a generic, blend for particular items that we would say are general items, or then focus those origins to more specialty products, or more, like what we call our black tie brand,
right?
In order to really.
So so the strategy that you're talking about, which is, so what I could do to ask and answer, to restate and answer your question at the same time. What I could do is I could go to a manufacturer and buy a bunch of different chocolates and make a custom blend. And I could use that. It's still a custom blend. It's our chocolate, right? And you could use that for the bow tie brand, right? Or, maybe, so the casual line, to keep with your black tie metaphor, but it's white tie that's the real fancy one. Right. So you could actually have two very different things. And if you wanted to, one way around all this is, again, using the blends, your custom blend, for the things that you want to be evergreen, the things you always have, that you're guaranteed to be a part of what it is that you're doing. So you're not really worried about the supply constraints in that kind of way. And what you can do is, if it's a blend of 3 different things, right? If I need to find a short-term temporary substitute for one of them, right? I can change the blend at any point to get to whatever it is that I want, right? And then what you're saying for limited time offer and seasonal and all these other kind of stuff, you're using a custom chocolate. And if it doesn't come back, it doesn't come back.
Right.
And that's a way to be able to position it that makes an enormous amount of sense.
Okay.
Okay? I'm sorry.
I have two questions.
Sure.
Kind of,
I have lots of answers, and maybe one of my answers will match your question.
all right. They're both kind of based on dragé.
Dragé.
So I do dragé, and I don't.
What do you use
want-
for a pan? A little KitchenAid attachment?
What's that?
How do you do the panning? How do you do the engrossing?
I have a panner.
Attached to a KitchenAid, or did you get a small one?
It's a standalone.
Fabulous.
It's from China. It's not
Okay.
the nicest thing, but it's got a big bowl.
Gotcha.
And one of my favorite things is seasonal. I soak tart cherries from Traverse City and bourbon for a couple months. I let them dry out mostly, dust them in cacao powder, and then I dragé them.
Right.
Awesome. How?
How they probably don't last very long.
What's that?
They don't last very long. Okay.
So how? I used to buy chocolate from Cocoa Berry or I forget the other
A
one.
Barry Calabout brand.
Yeah, yep. And I look at the fluidity of I think I like 3 or 4 is great for this.
Mhm.
How do I test my fluidity if I do a bean to bar chocolate? Is there a way that I could match that 4-drop fluidity with whatever I have making at home?
Yes, as a matter of fact,
All right.
there is a device. It's called a viscosity meter.
Okay.
Well, there are devices that are called viscosity meters. Some of them are really stupidly expensive,
Oh, that's
Right.
not good.
right? The least expensive one is you get a flat plane, it's usually glass or steel, and you put it at a particular angle.
Okay.
And then what you do is you pour the chocolate and you see how far it runs in a given amount of time
Okay.
until it stops.
So I can compare that against
Then you can compare
bean fluidity.
whatever. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's
At
the
right
way.
temp, at the both same temperature.
Yeah, everything's at the same temperature. You just put the chocolate and how far does it roll down, and you want to make sure that your stuff flows to the same distance that the fluidity that you like does.
Okay.
That's
A simple way.
That's-
I just need the ballpark.
great. Yeah, for the most part, your major problem is if you've got I'm assuming a dehydrated cherry, right? So you got
So I rehydrated it in bourbon. For
Well, but I'm saying you've got to
partially dehydrated it.
right.
And then cacao.
And then you've got cacao.
powder.
Your major production challenge is that any liquid
Yep.
that seeps through the cocoa powder layer and gets to the inner layer of the chocolate
Yep.
is going to cause the chocolate to break,
Gee.
right? And so what you're making that way is incredibly short shelf life. You do know that, right? If you get a couple of weeks,
3 weeks.
you're lucky, right?
They're gone.
Right. There is a company in Massachusetts called Flow Enterprises. And what Flow Enterprises does is they make a liquid that acts as an encapsulation agent. And that encapsulation agent prevents or at least slows down the migration of moisture, oxygen, and fat from one layer to another layer. So you could take the cherries, roll them in cocoa powder, and then first pan that in this encapsulation layer as a replacement for gum arabic. So many people who pan will pan the centers first with a gum arabic as an encapsulation layer to keep the fat in, for example, into the nut, so you don't have fat migration from the nut into the chocolate, causing it to separate and bloom.
Right.
But you could go to Flow Enterprises. The president of the company is named Rachel Friedman. She used to be a neighbor of mine. And they're in Massachusetts, made in the United States, no import tariffs. And you could get the product and you could use it as an agent. But they also it's vegan, really cool. And they also make the sort of glazes to polish and shine
Right.
as well.
Right.
Right. So if you are interested, Flow Enterprises
Okay.
in Massachusetts would be a place to go think about that. And it will probably add several weeks, right, if not months, to the shelf life of your cherries.
Okay. My second question is,
Right. So did you have a question?
I was going to ask, is this the same company that makes that ingredient that you were speaking
No,
about?
different company. So different company. So I'm gonna take yesterday's presentation. I'm gonna make some changes to the underlying Excel file.
Okay.
This is for people who are part of the official not members of the general public, but people who are exhibitors and are part of the teams. I'm going to be sending that. I'm going to make some changes. I know that Andal Balu of Cocoa Town was not happy about what she thought was, well, whatever she thought. So I'm gonna make some changes to that. And then there was the question about what that 7% meant.
Yeah.
And so I'm gonna make changes to the presentation. I'm also gonna translate it into Japanese and Spanish and send that off. And I'm gonna include the link to this company.
Okay.
All right. But so this is a different question because the program that I mentioned to you is available for businesses, not home hobbyists, right? So if you were doing this as a business, I could share information about this. But I've been asked, it's a limited time for chefs only to get in touch. You could use this product, right, for some things, but the one I mentioned from Flow Enterprises, if you were, for example, wanted to pan a peanut or pan an almond or something like that, you would first use normally gum arabic, but you can use this product, which is called Cozine, I believe. And that would be the first thing that you would do. It's part of their Master Coat series of glazes, I believe. And it's a product that is registered with the US Department of Defense. And with nuts, it'll give you 3-year shelf life, right, at 100 degrees Fahrenheit for nuts. And so it's used in MREs, so meals ready to eat for the military, to make sure that the nuts in these things don't go rancid. Right? So if you were to have like a confectionery center, like a malted milk ball, or you were to have a nut or a coffee bean or something like that, and you wanted shelf life, the first thing you would do is you would engross or pan the center with an encapsulation agent. Right? And you could do that. Right? And you can do the same thing. So if the cherries are relatively stable, you've got the cocoa powder, the first thing you're doing is you're putting them into chocolate. But if you were to use this Cozine, I believe is the name, it would keep all the moisture in, right? And as I say, it's vegan.
And that's what shelf life is all about, more moisture.
Moisture control. Well, in this particular case, it keeps the moisture in, and what it does is the moisture gets into the chocolate, it'll pull the sugar out, and the chocolate will start to crumble.
Yeah.
Right, so that's one of the ways. It not only increases the shelf life, but it maintains the stability of the shell. So, yeah. Okay. Did you have another question?
No, that's it.
All right, so we got,
So yes, as I'm getting older, I like the pan less and less.
Okay.
And I'm going to bean to bar more and more, keep it simple.
you've chosen the hardest thing there is to do.
What's that?
Bean to bar is the hardest thing there is to do. Of all the things there are to do in chocolate and
I think
confecting,
panning's more difficult. More artisan.
that's just practice.
Yeah.
That's just practice, right? And it's also the equipment. I mean, if you have a really, really good panner, then panning, it's time consuming because you need to be there and you need to watch it,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Well,
But
scoop it in and everything.
you know that chocolate doesn't have to be tempered. You know that chocolate doesn't have to be tempered,
Right.
right? So many people make the mistake of thinking they have to temper the chocolate when they're panning.
Right.
The process of panning tempers the chocolate, so
melt it and there's
you don't need to worry about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you do need to have proper temperature and humidity control
Right, right.
in order to do it well. So
Right.
there is that.
Right. So I'm trying to keep my great selling Drage bourbon cherries. I want to take those bourbon cherries, maybe dehydrate them, maybe chop them up, maybe granulize them, and then add it as like an inclusion
Right.
flavoring to my
Chocolate.
bar. 70%. I kind of do a 70% and
All right.
any
Okay.
thoughts on ideas how to go about that? I don't know. They just put them on the bar as they're molding, or kind of dehydrate them to condense the flavor. And
So right now I'm guessing you hand fill the molds.
yes,
All right. The only way to automate hand filling the molds, right, if you have inclusions, is to get a depositor specifically designed to handle inclusions.
okay,
You can get tempering machines, which will handle fairly large size inclusions.
I use silk.
They're going to be 12 or 15. Well, the only way to automate filling of molds with inclusions is going to be with some kind of depositor, right? If you're using silk, then you're talking about hand depositing, right? Right. In which case, you have two options. You incorporate it into the chocolate, right? And then you fill the molds, or what you're going to do is you're going to sprinkle. So that's a separate issue.
Okay.
All right. Or what you're going to do is you're going to sprinkle on the back. You need to decide what you're going to do. Right? And the technical challenges you're going to have with respect to the moisture is the same for both of them. Right? Is that if there's any moisture in the inclusion, right, what it's going to do is it's going to cause the boundary layer to fail. And it is going to crystallize and the thing is going to fall out. So you need to encapsulate. So you can use this same product I'm talking about, Cozine, to encapsulate those things and use it. Or in a larger scale, you could use the same product that I mentioned in yesterday's to do the same thing, especially with high fat items. So the product that I was mentioning yesterday finds its roots in molecular gastronomy. And it's using some of the ingredients that are made famous in doing stable foams, for example, espuma, that are used in high-end restaurants, and then finding applications for them in stabilizing high-fat, high-moisture, right, materials that normally won't be very, very stable. Right? And so you could use that same product to have a high-fat item like bacon, and bacon in a ganache. And what will happen is it will form a boundary label that will stabilize the thing so it will have extended shelf life, right? So again, you can use it for multiple kinds of applications. We talked about it, like marshmallows, like do chocolate marshmallows and things like that. But you could do a chocolate marshmallow that's got a high fat or high acid inclusion in the marshmallow, which would normally break down the marshmallow and it would last like, an afternoon. This would give you a shelf-stable, no-cook marshmallow. Right? So again, it's using what we know from molecular gastronomy, right, to create an emulsifier which is more flexible than lecithin. It's a good way to think about it. All right. But in your particular case, what you're going to do is you're going to need to dehydrate it, get it as dry as you can. It doesn't need to be bone dry, but then you're going to take this encapsulation layer, Cozine, and you're going to try to make sure that the moisture doesn't come from it into the chocolate. That's the important part. Because the moment you have any moisture and it hits the chocolate, you're going to crystallize the sugar. You're going to pull the sugar out of the suspension, and you've got this mechanical failure, and everything's going to parp, and your bar is going to break easily, and you've got a bad texture and all that kind of stuff.
Now, if I would dehydrate it and incorporate it into the melanger.
That's how technology.
So putting the cherries in the melanger and refining, that's an entirely different thing. It's another way of incorporating the flavor. And but I would do both. Because I would refine the cherries into the chocolate, and then I would cherries in the inclusion, and I would use actually a different cherry so I get different expressions of cherry. So to play with it, or right, use a cherry that wasn't macerated in bourbon for one purpose and a cherry that was macerated in bourbon for another. There are lots of ways to go about playing with that, but you have two very different presentations. It's like coffee. How am I going to refine the coffee beans into the chocolate, or I'm going to take the coffee beans which are ground into a fine powder and incorporate them as an inclusion, or I'm going to do cracked cocoa beans as an inclusion. What you're doing is you're introducing the flavor of coffee in different ways, right, and that are mediated by how your saliva interacts with the fat to deliver different expressions of flavor at different times. So it's a way to get a lot of complexity in things just by incorporating an ingredient in different forms at different sizes into a bar.
Varying flavors.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's all we have time for. Thank you, Adam. Thank you both for great questions. And, sometimes you have, 20 people in the room and you only have like 30 seconds per answer. And here we had the opportunity, because there were just a couple of people in the room, to take some deep dive technical questions, right, and answer them in detail. And for people who might be watching this after the fact, I hope you enjoyed this AMA. My name's Clay. I run thechocolatelife.com. Come and visit me. And if you're not here in Rushville this year, you missed the opportunity to do this in person. So put us on the calendar for next year. Cheers, everyone.